Welcome to the Medical Mnemonist Podcast, brought to you by Med School Coach. Each episode, take a journey into the top techniques for medical mnemonics, study skills, board exam tips, and accelerated learning in higher education. Now, here's your host, Chase DiMarco.
Today, we're joined by Dr. Leila Javidi, MD-NPH, and a family medicine practitioner that also has 5 years of tutoring experience through med school tutors. First off, I'd like to start off just asking a little bit about your background with med school tutors and sort of what you do there.
Yeah, so my background is kind of interesting because I started out as a student myself. I was not a very good test taker. In fact, I was such a bad standardized test taker that I didn't even get into a US medical school. I had to go to a Caribbean medical school, which I'm very grateful for that opportunity, but I almost kind of failed out of there as well because I just didn't understand the process of test taking at all. And so I got through med school, but the first 2 years, but when I started having the opportunity to study for step one, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to begin. I knew that I wouldn't really do well in a very structured class setting because I was always a self-directed learner myself. So I kind of Googled help. Is there anybody who can coach me through the step one? And med school tutors showed up, and I ended up working with a tutor who is now a lifelong mentor of mine. And after literally going from a student who couldn't get into a US medical school to a student that got a 249 on step one through the help of my tutor, I was offered a position to actually tutor for med school tutors myself. And I started tutoring for that. Then I took step two, did very well in that as well. And then as I went through my education, I just really grew to love the company, and I kind of grew out of the tutoring for step one role. So as I was growing out of that role, we kind of were even developing new roles within our company. So from there, I did residency advisement. I've done general mentoring with other tutors. And then now I'm actually working most of the time with our consulting arm, which helps to consult with administrators and faculty of medical education institutions to sort of help their students on a global scale. And I don't have to do it. I'm a doctor, but I feel really passionate about how they helped me. And I know there's a lot of students out there that need that kind of help. So I'm still into it.
I actually come from a similar background, terrible test taker, especially when it comes to standardized exams. I went to an international Caribbean school. I bet there's a lot of advice that you particularly have learned about through your tutoring and through your own personal experiences for what things students might need to look out for. When can they decide actually that they need a coach versus, keep plugging along on their own?
I think that if you're trying to accomplish something, it depends on what stage you're in, right? I think that if you're even in undergrad and you're not certain of your pathway to medical school, maybe you don't do well in chemistry, that was me. I had to retake general chemistry multiple times. I think that's when you might say, maybe somebody else might have a better idea of how to do this. And sometimes those people are people who struggled with it themselves, but not everybody who struggles turns out to be a good teacher. So at any point that you kind of realize the efforts that I'm putting forth are not coming out with a good result, that is time to at least kind of reach out for help in some way.
Yeah, it seems like the general consensus on the forums is, just do UWorld twice and you'll be fine. It's that doesn't always work for everyone. Some people, it takes a lot longer to get through the questions, like myself. I have reading disability, so I can only go through 10 questions in the time someone else can maybe do 20, 30, or even 50 questions. So the generalized advice is not as useful. And I guess it does take tutoring session really find out what some of your mistakes are, where your roadblocks are, and kind of go from there.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the things that I really liked about med school tutors, and what happened with me was I didn't necessarily need help with content, somebody coaching me, but I needed somebody to figure out what was the issue. And it turned out that my particular issue was that I was starting with reading and learning and then doing questions. And, I learned how to mold the human body out of clay, but I couldn't answer an anatomy question. So my tutor, my coach kind of helped me learn the reverse process of learning how questions are asked and how to go through a question, and then only spending time doing high yield studying for those types of questions. That's the way that people do it. But that was my issue. There's hundreds of other issues out there, learning disabilities, even just time management skills, or, trying to retrain your brain in different ways. So it's helpful to have somebody sitting there with you one-on-one triaging those needs.
Agreed. My co-authors and I came out with our book, Read This Before Medical School, last year. Well, it's going to be almost 2 years if this comes out in 2021, but it came out in 2019. It was really trying to see what all of these skills are, what can students do on their own, and then when can they really determine, hey, I need help. This isn't working, or that's not working, or I just don't even know what's going on. So I think it's important that these types of companies are out here for that, to really help struggling students and to point out the weaknesses that they might not be aware of.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the biggest misconceptions is that there's one right way to do things. There's one way of studying. I know students right now, there's a ton of them that learn all of their content through spaced repetition apps like Anki. And I think my brain would explode if I had to learn from disparate pieces of information. But some people learn that way. So there's not one right way. And sometimes you're right. These forums are very like, all you got to do is do UWorld and Anki and you're good. And you're just like, oh, okay, perfect.
Yeah, exactly. That's why we try to throw in a lot of like picture mnemonics and other ways to make it more creative, more interesting, putting all the pieces together. But I guess we could go here to let the students know a little bit is what would they expect if they decided they wanted to use a tutoring service such as yours? What do they have to go through? What's the process?
Yeah. So basically, as soon as you are reaching out to us at Med School Tutors, you're going to be hooked up with one of our awesome support members of the student relations team. So that's one of our benefits, is that we have a sort of liaison to the student that's not the tutor. And they work with you on a detailed intake about your testing history, your school history, and not just in medical school or pre-med, but just generally. Who do you work with better? Are you somebody who works with a drill sergeant better, or do you need a lot more of light encouragement? Do you need both? Like, what are your concerns and fears? They do a detailed intake, and then they try to match you up with a tutor that is sort of custom built for you. So then you'll have usually a trial session with that tutor. And usually during that trial session, which is about an hour to 2 hours long, depending on the circumstance, you will go through maybe a standardized test like an NBME or a MCAT, whatever you're studying for. And you're going to go through it with the tutor and walk through your thought processes. They're going to learn who you are, why you answer questions a certain way, what you struggle with. And then after meeting with you for a 2-hour period, they're going to come up with a recommendation of, how many sessions might you need? Some people it's very low touch, and some people it's very high touch, depending on their motivation, their, time management ability, their test taking history. And so then once you have a recommendation, you work it out with the student relations team to come up either with a package of tutoring hours, or we do have pay as you go options, especially since in the past year, things have been so crazy that you don't even know, we don't even know when we're taking our test at this point. So there's a lot of different options. And then generally we recommend you meet with your tutor like at least once a week. And you may do anything from going over specific content to reviewing your schedule, kind of going through fears. It just really depends on what the student needs.
Okay, so that's a lot of different, test taking skills, content skills, test prep. Depending on where they're at, they're going to need certain skill levels and skill sets. What do you think distinguishes MST from other test prep companies that are out there?
I think there's a lot of different things based on my experience. The number one thing is the quality vetting of our tutors. Essentially, our tutors have to perform a certain level on these tests that they're tutoring for, but that's not the only thing that they have to do. They also have to demonstrate their ability to teach and essentially have good communication skills with students, making sure that they want to be there. We don't have people who are just coming willy-nilly. It's not really a random side job that you do. Sometimes if you work for MST, it's a culture. You get paired up as a tutor with a mentor like myself. I used to be a tutor mentor. Now I haven't done that in a while because I'm further out from that tutoring. But when a student works with MST, they're not just working with their tutor, they're working with the student relations team liaison, and they're essentially working with the tutor and their tutor's mentor and the team that backs the tutor in general. So that's one of the biggest things. And as we go along through that process, tutors have regular evaluations based on student feedback, based on student performance, based on their mentor's feedback. So they have all kinds of things like that. So the quality and the student support and essentially the extensive experience are what initially is very much differentiating. And then on top of that are all the new frontiers of education that we've been able to infiltrate in. So not just doing one-on-one tutoring for step one anymore.
So do you think some of these that you mentioned, or maybe some other ones, would constitute a unique service that maybe your competitors don't have, something that really would stand out to a student?
Most tutoring companies or test prep companies have webinars and consultations and all this stuff. But I do not know of many that have a strong mentorship support group on the inside where there's this interconnected network. And then on top of it, we've had so much experience with one-on-one tutoring that we finally entered the realm and saying, hey, maybe we could intervene earlier before they're taking step one. Maybe we can talk to administrators at certain medical schools who see a pattern of poor results with their standardized testing. So that's kind of where we started working on an institutional level to sort of triage the needs of universities even. We're seeing, okay, well, your curriculum is very much doesn't have any step component in it, and we don't want to make it a step one university by any means, but you have to give students an opportunity to learn this test before they sit down to take it. So that is certainly a unique service. We also offer tons of free content for students available on Facebook, Instagram, our own website, our blogs, and it's all done in-house. It's all done by the people who we trust, who we've vetted, who've done hundreds of, even thousands of hours of tutoring with students.
And probably one of the most common questions I get asked by students is just how much something like this usually costs.
Yeah, so basically, it really just depends on what you are going to set to accomplish. We do also have, I believe we have situations where we can do need-based funding for your tutoring. You know, if you do not have the ability, we want to have equitable access, right, for students. So we don't want it to only be students who have lots of money to be able to afford support. Also, because we partner with institutions, oftentimes we can do institutional discounts when we work heavily with their student population. But I would say that it depends on how much time, but it's probably going to be in the 1,000+ range, depending on how extensive. But you could maybe even just have a few hours and it'd be a couple $100s in that case. So it just really depends on how much support you're getting, how often, and even the tier of the tutor that you're getting. But our pricing is actually completely transparent on our website. I'm just not very good with that side, because that's another great thing, is that they insulate the tutors from all that stuff so that we can just focus on the actual student and not have to worry about pricing and stuff like that.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, I remember trying to look a few years ago, writing a blog post to compare the prices. And it was really, I felt difficult to find some of the pricing ranges, but Maybe a lot of that it's changed now, a lot more transparent than it used to be.
Yes, it is. Because that's something we've learned. I mean, that's something that is going to immediately deter somebody. Why would I look further if it's completely out of my realm? But it is now a lot more transparent.
Okay. So then what is on the horizons for MST? What are the new things that are coming up?
Yeah. So I guess there's different horizons in all the different realms. We are expanding our services. We've already done so. We don't just do step 1, step 2 tutoring. We now can see you as a student from any stage of your training. We will tutor you as a pre-med student to help you, get into the med school game. It can be a consultation kind of thing, or it can even be tutoring for the MCAT. We also do residency advisement. We do board certification tutoring. I actually just recently tutored for a student who'd worked with MST previously for her steps, and then now she's taking her family medicine boards. And I actually worked with her to help develop a study plan. Actually, over 50% of our students that we have are repeat students. So they've worked with us for other exams and they come back. So I've had students that I've tutored literally for step 1, step 2, step 3, and now possibly their board certification examination or residency advisement and all that stuff. And then one of the biggest things that's on the horizon is that we're very cognizant of the changes of what we're going to need to do to help prepare students in a world where your score is now pass fail. So how do we prepare students for residency and becoming competitive without that number? There's a lot of different ways and a lot of considerations, and we've been really spending time brainstorming with that and working toward that.
Awesome. Well, I guess all that's left is to tell the audience where they can find you and use some of your services as well as your colleagues.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm personally a family doctor. So you can come to Columbus, Ohio. No, I'm just kidding. But if you want to work with med school tutors, you can just go to medschooltutors.com. And there's also a consulting service for administrators, medschooltutorsconsulting.com. And you can just reach out to us there. We're also available on Facebook, on Instagram as Med School Tutors. Pretty simple stuff. We're very accessible. And I think people are on vacation right now because this is New Year's Eve after all, but we're pretty quick turnaround if you reach out to us and you need help. We'd be happy to do so.
Sounds good. Dr. Javidi, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your experiences with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Have you been thinking about one-on-one training and tutoring at a reasonable price? Well, Prospective Doctor is now sponsoring a limited number of free sessions with me each month. To register, you can go to prospectivedoctor.com/chase and register for a free 30-minute coaching session. If you decide that you want to use their MCAT or USMLE tutoring services, you can now use the code CHASE10 to receive 10% off of your first $400 spent. Just enter CHASE10 and get your discount now.
The Medical Mnemonist podcast is powered by Med School Coach. To access Med School Coach services, including USMLE tutoring and residency admissions advising, visit our website at medschoolcoach.com. Good luck as you prepare for your board exams, and we hope you tune in again next time.